Commander. I'm getting us out of here.
After a tense run-in with some House Kurita forces, I see that one of my employed MechWarriors is apparently going to be out for 57 days with injuries. Oh, come on, that's more paid time off than I've ever had in my entire life. Take the weekend to rest up and get back in the Jenner on Monday, you slacker. I have a demanding business to manage here, and more importantly, buildings to gleefully stomp on and a huge variety of giant robots to blow up. MechWarrior 5 brings some great old-school joy, and it certainly hasn't developed much sentimentality in its time away. It's been almost 2 decades since we got a single-player MechWarrior game, but it seems like Piranha Games has gone to quite a bit of effort to not mess up the task of picking up where it left off. Mercenaries includes over 50 mechs to pilot, from the sprightly Locust to the hulking Annihilator, and each comes with a handful of variants with different weapon loadouts. These can each be further customized in truly impressive fashion with a variety of destructive lasers, missiles, and ballistic weapons. You can even fine-tune the armor on every part of your mech down to each individual point. Or there's a handy Deck Me Out fam button to fill in the gaps for those of us who don't need to get that granular. There are a couple of classic features missing from the mix, like stealth, electronic warfare, and melee attacks, and while I did miss them, the sheer variety of what's here still satisfied me with that modular, freeform feeling of optimizing my death machines that's essential to MechWarrior. The control options are fairly exhaustive to boot. There's both mouse and keyboard and gamepad support, the latter of which works surprisingly well for such a complex game, but I was also pleased to find full joystick support, as that's how I most fondly remember playing MechWarrior back in the day. I discovered shortly after digging out my Logitech Extreme 3D Pro that I'm not any good at it anymore, but I was glad to have the option. Once inside the cockpit, there's a definite learning curve if you're new to the series or just very rusty like I was. Managing your throttle and moving the mech torso independent of leg facing isn't super intuitive, and it never has been, but it felt great once I got back into the groove. MechWarrior has always been about trying to wrangle this enormous, lumbering hunk of steel and destruction, and MechWarrior 5 recaptures that internal battle admirably. Whether I was stomping an enemy stronghold to dust or dueling another mech in tight confines of a cramped canyon, I was usually having a blast. And sure, this isn't the best looking game I've ever played, but the mechs and environments have a lot of style and retro flair I appreciated. Plus, the heavy, distorted guitars that make up the soundtrack made me want to crank up some early 2000s Firewind tracks and headbang my way to victory. Managing the open-ended single-player campaign isn't always as exhilarating. It takes place on an almost dauntingly large map of Battletech's inner sphere during the tumultuous days of the Third Succession War. There is a loose story with some fairly good voice acting woven throughout, but it often faded into the background as my attention was on the theoretically endless task of exploring the stars, taking mercenary contracts, and trying to keep the business afloat while bolstering my reputation. Especially early on, the economics of it all can feel a bit oppressive. The lighter, weaker starting mechs with inexperienced pilots tend to take a lot of damage, which means you're paying out a lot of your take and repair bills and waiting around for wounded warriors to get better. Until you have time and cash to build up a stockpile of extra mechs and spare components to swap in for the ones that get blasted beyond repair, you can end up in a financial death spiral fairly easily. It even costs money to jump between systems, which is a workable way of making sure you don't wander into dangerous waters before you're ready, but also really restricts your ability to explore and get a bearing on your surroundings. Part of me likes this feeling of being desperate, broke, and hungry for the next job. Maybe it's relatable as a freelance writer, but it can be frustrating to have to reload a save or start over when you realize you're too far into the hole to climb out. As I developed a bigger operation with more mechs and a stronger bench, these problems faded away and I became more worried about profit margins and reputation. The rep system is a nice touch. Every potential employer will be pitting you against one of the others, so you can't do anything nice for someone without pissing someone else off. You'll make enemies no matter what, but the friends you stay loyal to will grant you perks like increased pay or a greater share of salvage after a battle. On top of this, there's an online co-op mode that lets you run pre-made scenarios or have a friend drop into your campaign as one of your lance mates, which works great and is usually a lot more fun than lone wolfing it. MechWarrior 5 checks most of the boxes I would have asked for out of a modern revival of the series. There are tons of mechs that can be kitted out in tons of ways, and they're a lot of fun to drive. The campaign is expansive, complex, and reactive, though at times it can also be aggravating and directionless. The mission structure can also feel a little repetitive after a while, but a variety of exciting environments serve to mitigate this. And casually plowing directly through a row of high-rises in an atlas? Well, that never gets old. For more robots, check out our reviews of Terminator, Resistance, and Stormland. And for everything else, stick with IGN.